Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, joined by Mike Boland. Mike, how's it going?
Hi, Charlie. Going well.
Great. So, Mike, tell us what you're working on.
Yeah, so I've been tracking a trend lately that is the unsexy and boring world of online calendars. But it's interesting. This is an area that doesn't really get a lot of updates. Doesn't really get a lot of like airtime during those developer conference keynotes where they roll out all the sexy stuff first. But what's weird is that in the last few weeks alone, we've seen this like uptick, this acceleration in updates for online calendars, mostly around Google Calendar. So essentially, I'll roll through each of them. There are three that we've been tracking. So the first one is Google Calendar is now more transactional for small businesses. So essentially what they've done is they've taken all the standard functionality of Google Calendar, but they've sort of professionalized that for service bookings. Including like actually taking transactions. So as a small business, and I'll pause to say this is perfect for certain types of small businesses, anyone with sort of like time-based work. And it's particularly suited towards what we call the VSBs, or very small businesses. So we're talking like, music instructors and tutors and, just any time-based service. So what they can do is essentially they can now send a link to a subject or a customer to then like book an appointment, which isn't anything new. It does the standard calendar functionality. It generates a calendar invite and it's got all the details on there. But there's an additional step now, which they can check out and transact through this flow. And to do this, Google has partnered with Stripe. So the business in question has to have a new or existing Stripe account, connect it to Google Calendar, and then they're off to the races. And standard Stripe fees apply, and Google actually isn't taking a cut, but you got to pay the standard Stripe fees. So that's the first one. The second one is sort of related to that. Google Calendar is now getting self bookings that are sort of like Calendly. That's where my mind first went, and I'll sort of explain what I mean by that. For those unfamiliar, Calendly, their sort of core value proposition is to just generate a link, and you email that link, or you publish it on your website, or you email it to your subjects, and then the people that you want to schedule something with can just self book themselves. People love it. We actually use this on for our podcast when we do sort of guest bookings. We use this, and what it does is it eliminates all of that traditional manual back and forth of, hey Charlie, when are you available? Oh, how about Tuesday at 5? Okay, no, well, how about Wednesday at 6? And this and that, and back and forth, and you do a manual calendar invite. It basically eliminates all that. It streamlines it. You just send someone a link with all of your preordained available slots, and then the person on the other end just self books themselves, and then it just generates a calendar invite, and then everyone's all set. So anyway, that's the second one. The third one is now Google Calendar is doing location and status updates. So think of this like social media, where you have like your status update, what you're doing, how you're feeling, etc. But this is particularly built around location. So they've integrated a function that sort of tells the world what you're up to and where you are, and this particularly applies to the types of Google Calendar users that have sort of shared calendars. Like if you have a Google Workspace account with several colleagues and use it to like book stuff or put time on someone's calendar, this location sort of awareness function is cool because it basically adds context. So, they already had a location sort of awareness thing that was similar to this, but it was like the days of the week. This now brings it into granular day parts. Like I'm going to be in the office this afternoon, but in the morning I'm working at home. And that provides context to anyone looking at my calendar that, oh, wait, I'll wait for Mike to get to the office because I need to talk to him then. The way this sort of manifests is a new event type. Like Google Calendar, as you know, has a bunch of event types like, meeting, event, all day, whatever. Like this is a new event type called working location. And you can just sort of update yourself to inform colleagues or whomever about where you are. And it'll roll out immediately to Google Workspace users. All three of these things I went over are essentially Google Workspace features. And again, it's just interesting that after really just the same sort of calendar functionality we've had for a while, every once in a while there's updates. We've seen these 3 updates in the last 2 weeks alone. So not sure if that's emblematic of anything that Google is sort of pushing or accelerating around the calendar stuff, but notable. And all 3 sort of apply closely to small businesses and helping them sort of operate and market and schedule themselves.
So a couple things jump out at me, Mike. One, when you're just talking about, the where am I working today thing,
Yeah.
the first thing that pops into my head was Howard Lerman's demo of
Yeah.
Rome at our conference, where he talked, yeah, and also conversations we've subsequently had with Howard, where he talked about, that being one feature of his platform, Rome. I don't want to make this about Rome because we've talked a
Yeah.
lot about it already, but it does make me think, is Google reacting in any way to what we've been
Maybe.
calling remote tech stack that's
Yeah.
evolving? And I'm just wondering, I don't
No, I
know.
think so. I think, well, it's 2 things. One is it's clearly a sign of the times because in the post-COVID sort of era of remote or hybrid work, it makes sense that you may want to know where someone is because in the old world, they were just always in the same place. You didn't really need this. And now the fact that it's more dynamic means that. But number 2, what you're suggesting is not just sign of the times and the demand signals around it, but the fact that it is sort of sensing that there's competition brewing all around it, including Rome
That's kind
and
of what I'm getting
others.
at. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like they might have sensed that and want to get ahead of it and add that in there. And your question always also reminds me of the overall broader question of why. Like, why is Google doing this? It's always important to ask why. And I think that one of the reasons is, they want to just make calendars more sticky. And that's pursuant to the even broader goal of why Google wants you to use any of its stuff, which is to sort of get you sort of stuck in its ecosystem where it will monetize later through search ads. But they want you to use Gmail, they want you to use Calendar, they want you to use Google Docs, etc. And these moves simply make calendars more attractive and sticky. Like, for example, I mentioned that Google isn't taking a cut of revenue in that first item, which is the sort of transactions. Stripe will take a transaction because that's their business
Right.
model. Google isn't. And this could be an opportunity for them to just, get a little revenue, but they're not interested in that. They're interested in the, their end game, which is making this more sticky and bringing people into the Google family of products ecosystem
Yeah.
where they will monetize later.
They generally look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
a bigger picture opportunities, not altruism. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, okay, that's really interesting, and I think kind of dovetails with kind of what I not doesn't kind of dovetail with what I want to talk about. It neatly dovetails with what I want to talk about, which is something that I've been observing or that I was looking at recently, and that's Shopify. And this gets back to Google momentarily, but Shopify did something interesting, and it rolled out something that is embedded in the calendar of every Shopify employee, and I think there's something like 10,000 of them, which is a tool, and I think they developed it internally, that measures the cost of every meeting, every
Hmm.
online meeting that a Shopify employee engages in. And it takes in who's on this call, video conferencing, I'm assuming, who's on this call
Their
or this
salary.
video conference, what's their level, what's the duration of the call, and then does the math that you would imagine it needs to do to figure out that this call cost us $1,700 or whatever. I think the average amount I forgot was 1,000-ish. I
Yeah.
wrote it down somewhere, but I forgot the exact number. But there was a number that was shared about it, the average cost. And what was interesting about that was, one, that this was kind of on brand for Shopify because they laid a marker like right at the beginning of the year where they said any recurring meeting over three people with more than 3 people is booted from the calendar. Basically, no more recurring meetings of 3 people or more. And I believe they're adhering to that policy, if I'm not mistaken. And that created a lot of buzz, like, and back to Howard again, he talks a lot about this notion of calendar zero, where you basically have no recurring meetings in your calendar, in your daily calendar. So what's interesting about kind of what you mentioned and what I'm mentioning here with Shopify is sort of the push and pull between making calendars more optimized and making calendars less central to our daily work life.
Yeah.
And I think there's some tension between those two things. And what's interesting, sort of laying on top of what Shopify did, and I mentioned the remote tech stack a moment ago, something we talk about fairly often. Um, David Shim, David, by the way, we'd love you on the podcast someday. If you're listening, he does something called Read AI. It's a start. He's a, guy familiar to local from Placed, I guess. I forgot all the companies he's
Foursquare.
been at. Foursquared, Placed, yeah.
Mhm.
And now Read, which is an AI-driven future of work play. I call it remote tech. You call it your coinage, by the way. Where he has a Chrome extension that does just this. So it gets back to Google Calendar, I guess, in a sense, where you can have Read's Chrome extension basically perform the same measuring the cost of the meeting functionality. So it's really available to anyone now. Anyone
Yeah.
can sort of say, I'm going to figure out what this time really costs. Is it really worth it? Having 7 people on at 4:00 every Wednesday to talk about the same damn thing. And what does that cost us? And what are we getting for that cost? I think if this is widely adopted, and I'm not sure if it will be, it could lead to some important and uncomfortable conversations within organizations.
Yeah. I love the transparency, and I've been saying forever, a cost of a meeting isn't just the 36-minute meeting. It's 36 times all of the people in the room and their salaries. Although the
Right.
salary thing is interesting. It's if someone's salaried, it's a sunk cost. It's more of an opportunity cost. If you're actually paying people on a contract basis, that is a direct cost. If they're
Right.
salaried, it's something you're paying either way. So it's really the opportunity cost between that meeting and them doing something else. But the point remains that the transparency of that number in the corner of the Zoom call or whatever platform you're on, and I don't know what they've done with the UX, but you could have some fun with it. That after it passes $500, it just gets
Yeah. Ding,
big
ding,
and
ding, ding.
red and
Have a
blinking.
sound, a cash
Yeah,
register sound. Yeah.
yeah, or perhaps everyone's hooked up to nipple clamps where you get a shock or something. But no, in all
David,
seriousness,
are you listening? Yeah.
yeah, in all seriousness, the transparency I think is very cool, and I think that's what's going to cause managers and executives to really see and enact change when they see that number, because it's true. And I think that really what this gets down to, and this is sort of the thesis of Rome and of Read AI, which is that it's not just that meetings are bad, but right now it's this sort of cart before the horse, form over function. We're doing this recurring meeting, and that's where Shopify's sticking point is, where it just becomes this repetitive motion. You're not meeting because you have to. You're meeting or that you need to. It's just you're meeting because, hey, we always meet at Monday at
Because
3
it's in the
p.m.
calendar.
Yeah,
Because it's in the calendar.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And not only that, but the function we needed to get to was 8 minutes, but the form is 30 minutes. So, hey, we finished what we need to talk about. Now let's talk about who won this last week's football games instead, to
Right.
run out the rest of the clock. And it's just employees will take any chance you can give them to be lazy and to waste time.
Yeah.
And those recurring meetings are just a sort of breeding ground for that.
Yeah. And I think measuring it will show.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it
transparency. It's
shines
just
a light
bringing
on it. Shines
transparency.
a light on it. It shines a
Yeah.
light on it. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it shines
Yeah.
a light on the problem. And, I don't know if the next step is some sort of ROI metrics on meetings, because that's going to be really tough because
Yeah,
it's
to tie
probably
the meeting
zero.
to whatever revenue outcome. Yeah, that
Yeah.
attribution gets difficult, but yeah, that's
Very, very difficult, which again sort of underscores part of the problem, which is that
mhm.
often there's not a clear purpose, to these. But I think you make a good point. Not all meetings are bad; they're just maybe poorly constructed. You
Yeah.
know, and I think the idea of remote tech is not to eliminate meetings. And I think actually one of the things we've discovered in talking to Howard and Vinny Lingham and other people who are in this space is that it actually increases the number of meetings, but it
Yeah.
reduces
The
their
more
duration.
shorter ones.
Yeah. So you have more meetings during the day. They're just the cumulative time spent in them may be
Yeah.
less,
Mhm.
but the actual number of different meetings may actually increase.
And less
So
overall what I call garbage time,
yeah,
the
more intentional time, more
yeah, more
intentional.
targeted, the
The
time you're
idea is
spending
that they become more
doing stuff.
shorter, more intentional,
Yeah.
more outcome focused, but also probably more frequent. You
Yeah.
know, um, I think a lot of people would make that trade. You know, waste less time have shorter, more intentional meetings, or at least ostensibly would make that trade. Maybe once they're experiencing it, they're like, oh, wow, this is a little more intense.
Mhm.
I like the conversations about football and what cars we
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
buy, all that stuff. That was more fun. But yeah, I think in general, that is the direction that all of these things are pushing the workplace into. Whether it gets there, people are people, sometimes people resist things that make them more efficient, more effective. We'll see how that shakes out. So Mike, who won the week?
Yeah, so my selection for this week's winner is Maui Goat Yoga, which sounds weird, but it is a company that was on Yelp's top list. I forget exactly what they're calling the list, but they essentially ranked 150 of the top mom and pop shops in the United States. And they got together with Entrepreneur Magazine and did this. And they did it in 10 different categories, all the usual suspects of categories in local, home services and bars and restaurants and nightlife and all those. And I mentioned Goat Yoga, Maui Goat Yoga is just a joke. That's one of the companies that made the list. And this list was sort of divided between the sort of bread and butter staples of local, the salons and restaurants, and then some definite like hipsterific places. So Maui Goat Yoga is one of them. It's a top rated destination in Maui for all your, yoga needs and goat mingling needs. Another quick one I'll mention is the Beer Spa. This is a very cool one. This was in Denver. And it's basically, as it sounds, it's a spa. It's sort of a wellness concept that you go in and you relax, you sit in the hot tub, you do all these other things. But it's also like a craft brewery. And they just give you all these like, micro brews, and you can order one and then, sit in the spa, sip a beer. And they made the list as well. So anyone
I think you know which one I'm going to go to first.
Yeah. So there's a wide range of businesses, and just shout out to all the winners, but just those two in particular that I think are cool ones.
Yeah, if I ever do goat yoga, it's definitely going to be in Maui.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Okay, so I just have a real quick one. It's more of a shout out than a who won the week. Spectrio, company that's present at our conferences. Jimmy Hunt's a friend of ours, been on stage a lot at our conferences. His company Spectrio made an interesting acquisition of a company called In Reality. And what they do is it's kind of, this is, basically in-store video. And this is a tool that in a privacy sensitive way picks up, human traffic, in the presence of the in-store video. And it's just an advancement in their analytics capability that was pretty cool. So it's posted on Locology Insider if anyone wants to read more about it. But I just thought it was a cool technology, interesting acquisition. I just wanted to draw some attention to it. So I'll just leave that one there. All right, Mike, why don't you read us out?
Sure. So thanks, Charlie. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.